Hi everyone, it's John. It's Tuesday, so I have another review. I want to start out today's review in a little bit of a different way than I usually start them out, and to put a bit of maybe what I can only refer to as a trigger warning here at the beginning. I don't really often post markedly negative reviews. Almost all of my reviews have at least something to say that makes a book redeemable or interesting or to lend itself to a particular audience. But this one I found a lot of trouble with. And I'm going to spend the body of the review telling you all about the troubles I found with it. Another problem that the book has is that, as far as I can tell, in the booktube community, in the critical community, the book has been almost universally well received and praised. I'm sorry. I mean, this is a review for my channel, for my opinions, and I don't want to lie to anyone who might happen to, for whatever reason, value my opinion. So I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be truthful. I'm going to be open with what I think about this book. And if you happen to not be someone who enjoys reading critical, in the narrow sense of the word, as in negative book reviews, then maybe this isn't for you. Especially if you're someone who doesn't like reading book reviews of books that you love. And if you happen to love this book, which is Gilead by Marilyn Robinson, then this review especially might not be for you. So keeping that in mind, instead of flooding me with a torrent of comments about what a horrible person I am and how I clearly didn't understand the book, etc., etc., just keep those things in mind. Our opinions don't have to be the same. That's one of the wonderful things about living life and having your own opinions, right? So, with that said, let me move on to the body of the review. I'm sure most people are pretty familiar with the basics of the plot already. This has been out for going on 20 years. I think it was released in 2001, if I'm not mistaken. Like I said, almost universally adored. It's about an ailing old pastor by the name of John Ames, who resides in Gilead, Iowa. Because, after all, if it's good enough for the Bible and of Fred, it's good enough for Marilyn Robinson. And he spends his time in Gilead, Iowa, writing a long form letter to his son, who is still much too young to relate to his parents as adults. His son he had much later in life. The pastor's currently in his 70s, and his son is, I think, 6 or 7. And he's writing this letter to him in the hopes that he will be able to draw courage and strength from the letter well after he's gone, because he is suffering from a failing heart. Speaking a little bit about the novel's structure, I've never really been someone who needs a novel to have an action-driven plot or a form in order to find it effective or interesting. A lot of you familiar with my channel know I read a lot of sort of contemplative, philosophical fiction, a lot of classics. So I can really get a lot out of something that is quite inward-looking. But this book lacks any sort of thorough line that would even allow someone to suspend their judgment to imagine that they were reading a sustained narrative. Instead, there's just a lot of episodes told from John Ames's point of view that really seem much more invested in his virtue signaling than actually attempting to tell a story. For example, John Ames's father was a Christian pacifist, and his grandfather was a radical abolitionist during the Civil War. Because, of course, they were, right? I mean, this book seems to really give the impression that when Christians do something wrong, it can never be something as wrong as supporting slavery. It would have been, I guess, much more interesting to suggest for the reader that the Bible was actually used every bit as much to argue for slavery as against it. I mean, slavery exists all throughout the Old Testament, and people who were pro-slavery in the South and in the North would point to those passages and say that Christians should be pro-slavery. But that's never really mentioned in the book. It would also have committed the unpardonable sin of creating a protagonist whose historical past was not just whitewashed, was not almost wholly clean and ethically pure as the driven snow. It would have made John Ames an ethically complex and ambiguous person, having this kind of history with someone, a father or a grandfather involved in slavery in some indirect way. It would have been the perfect way for John, a third-generation Christian preacher at least, to show that he was somehow that he somehow attempted to struggle with his faith or reclaim it from those who have historically used it to harm others. Instead, we get a lot of, again, from the pastor, we get a lot of aw shucks navel gazing from a narrator who seems like he should simply be admired and patted on the head for making the life choices that he's made. At every turn, the novel seems like it's engaging in some sort of emotional extortion against the reader, whether it's the overly sentimental form in which it's written, like I said, a long-form letter written by an old man to the son whose adulthood he'll never get to see, and to the fact that he is perhaps a member of one of America's most protected classes, the white, elderly, middle-class, life-affirming, yet sometimes delightfully sententious man of God. All the while, the reader is having this bland, mealy, liberal cafeteria Christianity slowly fed to them while they're being fattened up like a Christmas goose. Ames seems really desperate to communicate that he's not a fringe biblical fundamentalist, and he's not, but he seems very, very eager to show you that he's not, by occasionally quoting thoughts from Karl Barth's Epistle to the Romans or Feuerbach, the German theologian and religious thinker. Their inclusion performs the sort of awkward function of neither making Ames' arguments seem more intellectually rigorous or interesting, while at the same time sending many of what I would imagine Robertson's most sincere Christian readers would be to this encyclopedia. I would highly recommend this for people who just like to pat themselves on the back after reading a few Bible verses, and never the ones that are utterly full of immoral nonsense doled out in passages like Exodus 21 about slavery, which I mentioned earlier. And also to people who have an audacious appetite for the soft, flabby moralizing that often gets passed off for inspirational thinking, whatever that is, in the eyes of the popular media in the United States. And I wouldn't really recommend it to much of anyone else, actually. So that's my review of an almost universally loved book. In fact, had I liked it, it might be universally loved. Unfortunately, it's one of the rare books I actually gave 2 out of 5 stars to. I usually don't mention star ratings because I think without some extra commentary thrown in, they're pretty meaningless. But I don't think I've ever given a 1-star rating. I couldn't even give it to this, but it doesn't get any more than 2 from me. If you have different opinions of Gilead, or any opinions, I would love to hear about them below. If your opinions differ, please be respectful. I would certainly appreciate it. Any flaming, any trolling, I'll just block you. It's what I always do. So, Gilead by Marilyn Robinson. There you go. Didn't mean to flick you off there. I will see you guys hopefully next week when you were thinking about turkey and ham and stuffing, at least all of my American friends, next week, and provided things don't get too busy at work. If they don't, I will see you next week, and if they do, I'll see you the week after.